Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords, and today's a slow news day, so I decided I was going to take a look at a couple of things from, I'm going to talk about OSR Insanity rules, and that's from the Invisible College in this case. I've got here the Invisible College and Sword and Caravan, my two latest big books. Invisible College is quite a bit bigger, it's, size-wise, I mean, but... Sword and Caravan's very big. Now, this is. I mean, it's not fair here because I've got the soft cover version. They both come in hardcover and soft cover, but I've got the hardcover version of Sword and Caravan, but only the paperback of Invisible College. But today I was going to talk about sanity rules. This is often a thing that you get in RPGs that becomes in some ways controversial, right? Never mind the kind of the woke stuff about mental health and whatnot, but just because it's something that usually involves players losing some agency over their character, which is the one thing that players should have agency about in an RPG, is that they should get to decide what their character does. But the problem is, a lot of times if a DM tells a player, well, now you are under an effect of fear, right? The player will try to game that in some way. They will try to find a way to not have to do something that is disadvantageous to them, right? Or you're charmed by this person. Well, a lot of times the player, if they're not, unless they're really good players, in which case they'll go all in, right? But if they're not, they can be very tempted. And so the rules have been set up in such a way that it takes away the player's choice. It lets the DM take over the player character, in essence, in at least in part regards, right? And so this is something that has often caused some conflict, right? Now, famously, Call of Cthulhu has sanity rules that give temporary craziness where a person just blacks out and starts doing whatever, and it's pretty much assumed that the player character will not have control of their character. But in the bigger sense, it solves the sanity issue by treating sanity as hit points, right? You have like a certain number of HP, or in this case, a certain number of sanity points, and you take damage to sanity when you see crazy things. In occult games, often you need to have some kind of sanity mechanic that would, allow you to regulate the horror aspect of the game. But it doesn't, a lot of times these are like subpar because really sanity doesn't work the way hit points work. So here I am in the chapter of Game Master Procedures, basically just like, rules, standard action rules. And these are, all of them are very, very similar to what you'll see in my Lion and Dragon book or whatnot. Apart from things like, a slightly different critical table and slightly different. I mean, there's gun burst rules and things like that you wouldn't see in Lion and Dragon because guns don't do burst attacks in the 16th century. But most of it is the same. Okay. Now, we get to, where was that? Here. Mental traumas, right? So this is the way that I handle it and in the OSR context. And let's see if there we go. So, there are games, in a game featuring potentially horrifying supernatural elements, player characters are expected to make the choice to role-play their reactions to different sort of experiences. But there are some incidents that could require rules to govern a mental state. In particular, the use of magic carries inherent risk to a magician's well-being due to working with symbols and archetypes that tap into the deep unconscious and which humans need to navigate with great care. So the first thing I state here is that basically, I, as a DM, and this is reflective of how I run the game, I want to choose to trust my players. Of course, I tend to have really good players because I do tryouts for my campaigns. I'm not just playing with my buddies. My games, at least for the last 10 years or more, have been games that have had long waiting lists of people in the local community to get, because I'm kind of a bit of a known quantity here, right? And so like I discriminate, right? You have to be somebody trustworthy to come in. Now there are some times when I like let someone come in blind, but usually it's on the recommendation of another player that I do trust a lot, right? And that works as a system. So I'm willing to say that as a rule, the players of my campaigns will tend to be of a higher quality. Meatball. You're on my book, Meatball. All right, will tend to be of a higher quality than what you would get in some other gaming groups, maybe. Right? That's fine. But I want to give them the chance, right? So you say, well, I want you to role play your character being afraid or being mentally affected in some way, and I'll try to leave it to them to do it. And I think that's in an OSR game, that's usually how you should do it. Unless, of course, the moment where you can change out of that is if the character has literally blacked out, right? Like if the PC is completely being dominated, right? Or they're completely out of the loop, right? Like their conscious mind is shut down because of whatever, magic or some horrifying event or what have you, then fine. Then the DM can run the character. But if the character is like still there and coping with something that is, like overwhelming fear or whatever it is, then they should end up having the opportunity to play it themselves with the understanding that the point is not to try to wiggle a way around being at a disadvantage, right? So anyways, in my game, most of the stuff, like I give here in this first column, there are checks that a low-level character might have to make about stress and trauma on extreme violence the first times that their characters encounters violence in the game. Right now, obviously, if your character already has a prior history of something where they're likely to have been involved in violence before, that's simply skipped. In the purpose of the Invisible College, it's not so much an exposure to violence or to the supernatural in and of itself that is the interesting part of mental trauma, right? Like, I think those things, they're, I get the Call of Cthulhu thing of this is what man was not meant to know, and so it's literally doing damage to your mind, right? Okay, that is okay. That's an interesting trope in horror. But I think far more interesting is the dangers of what one does with themselves in their own frame of mind, in their advancement in power, right? And this is something that I think would be of great use in all kinds of other contexts for magic use in OSR games, or indeed in any game. Where, in any setting, be it like, for example, sword and sorcery would be another obvious place where this would work, where magic has with it risks to the magician's mental state and also sort of to their soul and their identity as they grow in power doing it, right? So what I take here is actually not something that I've invented, categories that I've invented myself, but rather what books written by occultists who have been, kind of actually, real occultists who are paying attention to what it is that is dangerous in the path of magic, which I would extend to say is dangerous to anything to do with the path of self-cultivation, right? If you are engaging, whether it's in the pursuit of Western magic, Eastern meditation, engaging in mysticism of any kind, or even engaging in, let's say, sacerdotal paths within conventional religious structures, right? Like whether it's that you're becoming a reverend or a priest or a rabbi or an imam. I think that in all cases, these are the things that are potential challenges, right? And the three are megalomania, paranoia, and disconnection, right? So megalomania is where you end up having this incredible belief in your own importance, right? Which tends to be a problem with people who are experiencing religious phenomena, right? And everybody wants to be at the center of the mystical universe. So there's this comes all the way from every generation of Christians thinks they're in the end times, right? That's an example of spiritual megalomania. Because why do they think that? Well, because this is when they're alive, right? I'm alive right now. So obviously Jesus is coming back right now. He's been waiting for me, man. That's an example of spiritual megalomania. To, somebody who sits down and does Vipassana meditation for 40 minutes and says, I'm just like the Buddha now. Like that's something that happens too, right? And for magicians, because they are dealing with these incredible archetypal forces, it's very easy to get this idea of your own specialness, which you have to very, very much work to fight against. Paranoia is not quite so common, but it is a common thing anytime that you're dealing with elements where you question reality, right? So if you're engaging in a questioning of reality, and all religious, spiritual, and occult activity is to some extent a questioning of reality, it means that you can end up running into things that challenge all of your worldview, and in the process of that challenge, it makes you fearful of first of all, of there being like some spiritual forces that might be out to get you. Second, of there being, a world that is out to get you, right? It's the idea that there are, powers and principalities, to quote Paul the Apostle, right? And so, you have this idea of, it can lead to notions of conspiracies or of demonic activities, right? The demon haunted world. I think that, I don't remember if that was Sagan I think that was Sagan, or it was either Sagan or Richard Dawkins, right? So the demon haunted world is a real thing, right? It's a thing you have to keep in mind when you engage in hardcore spiritual pursuits, because most people at the beginning assume that that's not a real thing, and maybe it's not a real thing in the sense of what they would define at the beginning of their path as what is real things, right? But as you're going along, you realize that definition of real, which is like this kind of strict positive materialism, is complete bullshit. And that's not what real is. Real is so much more than that. And in that context, demons are real. And the third is disconnection, which is that if you get so caught up in this kind of spiritual world, these lofty peaks and what have you, it's very easy for you to stop caring at all about the mundane world, right? So you can imagine that this applies very well, obviously, to the Invisible College, but it also applies to, it could also apply to a magician in any D&D setting, right? Magicians deal with such enormous power, and even if you're not using a strictly sword and sorcery thing, if you're playing, whatever, Greyhawk or the Forgotten Realms, wizards, as they go up in level, become the most powerful class, right? And they're capable of doing these incredible wonders. So it's very easy to imagine wizards having to struggle with their own sense of grandeur, wizards having to fear that people are coming after them because of the power that they hold, and wizards starting to just simply not care about any of the proper conventions. It isn't just saying, well, I don't care about my a 9-to-5 job, which is one thing, but it's like you don't care about any kind of social mores, standards, or anything else because none of it really matters to you, right? So the mechanic, the way it works in the Invisible College, is that you have to do a particular saving throw, which you can, in the Invisible College, in all of my games, saving throws are based on a single number, your saving throw number, and then there are modifiers to different types of saving throws. So you might have, your number might be 15, which is you have to get 15 or higher on a D20, and you might have a +2 to saving throws versus poison, so you'd add +2 to your D20 roll when you're making the save, right? And it's always modified by something. So the sanity check here is modified by wisdom, and you have to do a saving throw in different kinds of situations that require a check. And in different games, this is where you could alter what you do it for, right? Like obviously in a game set in Waterdeep, it's going to be very different than a game set in, let's say, Dark Sun. And that's going to be very different than the Invisible College, right? But in the Invisible College, you do sanity checks. The first time a character ever encounters something obviously magical, the first time that they have to do a magic check for anything other than divination, the first time that they personally encounter an entity or archetype that isn't human, any time after that they suffer involuntary possession from a disembodied entity. And then there's also a variety of circumstances where performing magic might require saving throws against mental trauma. Most typically, if you get a natural 1 on your magic check, right? That's the basic one. So then every time you do these checks, you'll gain 1 or more levels in one of the 3 categories. And sometimes you're allowed to pick. Sometimes you'll say, well, do a saving throw, or you'll gain 1 level in one of the categories you choose, or it might say you gain 2 levels that you can put in any of these categories, or it might say you gain 1 level in either megalomania or disconnection, but not paranoia, or any other combination like that. So at each level, there are certain consequences that come about. Level 1 is just kind of the warning level, right? The person starts, if you're megalomaniac, you start to overestimate your own importance. At level 2, when you've got 2 ranks of megalomania, you're very impressed with your own power and will tend to look down on anyone who's not obviously superior in power or experience. Level 3, you're now significantly arrogant, acting as if you're tremendously powerful and important. You'll look down on anyone who's not clearly better than you are. Characters have a -1 reaction checks to him and to many charisma-based skills because the person's now sufficiently megalomaniacal to be really irritating. Level 4, the character's obviously constantly arrogant, has a -2 to reaction rolls, will tend to assume that he's the best at anything he does, even compared to people who are better or more experienced in any skill he actually has, at least, unless he's proven wrong, and then he'll hold a deep grudge against whoever showed him up, right? Level 5, the character believes he is almost uniquely special among humankind, a person guided by destiny. He'll have a -2 penalty as above. And also, in any situation that's not very clear imminent danger or totally and obviously outmatched, the player character will have to make a saving throw to take any action that would appear to be a recognition of inferiority of any kind, such as running away or surrendering. At level 6, the character believes at this point that he's beyond all of humanity, one of the chosen ones. He'll feel that all conventional laws or morality don't apply to him. He doesn't care about the lives or feelings of anyone. And any time that he realized that he needs, that the player character wants him to even have a chance to realize that he's outmatched or in real danger, he has to do a saving throw. And then afterwards, he will immediately try to justify the whatever his failure is, right? And then also, when you get severely bad at an insanity, it starts meaning that you can't continue to advance in your magical training. So he can, the highest rank that this focus is crazy. The highest rank that a magician can get if they've got level 6 or more in megalomania is the rank of adept, right? Level 7, the last one, the character becomes so that he believes all of reality is just a toy for their amusement. In essence, he believes that he is God. He'll have a -3 penalty to all reaction checks. He can still act semi-coherently, and that he might believe that he has to play the game that he has created, but will tend to be enormously overconfident in his ability to handle anything, and to vastly overestimate opponents. He's completely delusional, in other words, right? So that's one example. I'm not going to go through the other 2, but the point is that you see, as you build up in ranks, it becomes a bigger problem, right? And then there are ways, obviously, that you can reduce the mental trauma, right? So there's but it's not simple checks or something like that, right? In theory, somebody doing a ton of Jungian therapy might be able to reduce a rank in mental trauma if they make a saving throw, but usually therapy is pretty useless. Characters that have very high magical attainment, which is a mechanic specific to this game, can make an attainment check once a month to reduce a level. So that's like a reflection of how spiritually advanced the character is. That mechanic in particular, you may or may not end up wanting to use for your for your other OSR games. Engaging in meditation, retreats, or other religious activity has virtually no effect because the fundamental problem comes from a mismanagement of your spiritual experiences, right? So the ways that I present here that a character can restore themselves from the edge of insanity is by grounding fraternity and virtue. So grounding means basically you quit cold turkey from doing any magic for a certain period of time, and then that will give you a chance to reduce your level of magical insanity, right? The second, Jesus, what is going on with this thing? There. Fraternity means if you spend time with people in social contexts that have nothing to do with magic, then you can improve, right? And then third, virtue. If your character is spending a significant amount of time dedicating to some kind of charitable activity, which is defined as helping people in some kind of need without compensation and without involving magic, right? And so if you do those three things, which, let's face it, those are three of the things that are pretty vital for everybody's mental health, right? In any context, right? If you don't have those three things, then and you've been like suffering from mental health issues, you should really consider doing those three things, because they'll fix you a lot better than doing any kind of therapy, you know? So anyways, that's the way that I describe the sanity system. And as you can see, the sanity system here is not just like hit points, but mental or something like that, like what you get in the Call of Cthulhu. What they are is a set of rankings that act as mostly as guidelines, sometimes with certain obligatory saving throws to do stuff, that are guidelines for the player to play his character, and to play his character under the effect of certain types of mentally altered states. And I think that that's a very good system to use. And you can apply that system, like here it's in the context of magic, and you can certainly apply this, like if you had this book, you could port it directly over to using the same system for a fantasy OSR game or D&D or whatever. But you know, you could also do different versions, picking other categories than the three that I chose here, which are very specific to like spiritual, magical, occult sort of trauma. But if you could have other types of trauma, for example, for things like extreme violence, right, or you know, other types of conflicts of the mind, you know. So you know, and I just thought that I'd share this as I keep going gradually through the book of the Invisible College. Later on, I'm going to do the same thing with Sword and Caravan. And get you thinking about sanity mechanics in OSR games. And, you know, let me know what you think of the one in Invisible College. Let me know about which one you think is better, if there is any others. There haven't been an awful lot of them, I think, and it's something to take a look at, but also the question of how they should be done. I think that this way of doing it is a lot better than simply wresting full control from the player, or than doing like, you know, hit points, but mental. And I guess that was the essence of what I was trying to say. So if you like this video, please share it. Please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already subscribed before. And if you want to support me, check out my products like the Invisible College, like Sword and Caravan, like Social Encounters Along the Silk Road, which is my newest PDF product, which you can find from Anchor Games, which is the publisher of Sword and Caravan. Which is it's sort of related. It's about reaction roles and using reaction role mechanics to handle all kinds of complex social interactions like haggling and intimidation and debates and all that sort of stuff. Presenting your case in court, bribing people, et cetera, et cetera. It's not just for the Silk Road. It's, you know, it says Sword and Caravan because it's the same publisher, but you can use those mechanics in any fantasy game. And yeah, check that out. Check out all my products. Check out the RPG Pundit Presents series. I know that at some point soon there's going to be some other issue of RPG Pundit Presents coming out with Spectre Press, and eventually the World of the Last Sun Gonzo OSR source book, which will be full of Gonzo stuff for those of you who like the Gonzo stuff better than the medieval authentic stuff. And yeah, you're supporting me, keeps me going, keeps me doing this work. And at the same time, it also gives you something that you can actually use in your games. And again, spread the word, share the video. Thank you very much. Currently smoking Near Up Egg plus Cornell and Deal's Old Joe Krantz.